Hello and welcome to Using Lived Experience in Peer Recovery Support. Today's keynote presenter will be Greg Perry, who's the president of the West Virginia Certification Board for Addiction and Prevention Professionals. You can submit your questions for Greg at any time using the Q&A player in your WebEx feature. Simply look for that on the right side of your player and bring up Q&A and type your questions at any time. In addition to our keynote presenter, Greg Perry, I'm Shannon Wright, Director of Innovation for Quality Insights, who will serve as your MC today. And today's webinar is being produced by Misty Dyke, a communications specialist with Quality Insights. This webinar is part of a month-long celebration of Recovery Month 2020. You may have seen much information in social media with various themes and topics on each day. We started off with the month talking about stigma awareness. Last week was Pathways to Recovery. This week consists of trainings and resources. Next week's a call to action. Then we wrap up Recovery Month 2020 with a celebration in week 5 of September. In addition, you see there are daily themes as well for each day during Recovery Month. Mondays are for lived experience, hence today's webinar. Healthy Connections is the lead social media partner for Recovery Month 2020. If you'd like more information or to help us get the word out about all of the great events and happenings during Recovery Month, simply go to Healthy Connections Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter pages shown on your screen there. We'd love to have you repost the information for each and every day during Recovery Month. On many days, we have 2 or 3 separate posts on all 3 platforms, highlighting the excellent work being conducted throughout the state of West Virginia. If you're not familiar with Healthy Connections, we're a coalition based in Huntington, West Virginia that helps pregnant women, mothers, and their families navigate treatment and support services available in the community. Healthy Connections consists of more than 30 Huntington area agencies all working together. Quality Insights is one of the largest nonprofit organizations devoted to improving healthcare quality in the United States. We use data and community solutions to achieve the goals of better care, smarter spending, and healthier people. Our 300-plus employees and consultants have experience in healthcare delivery, continuous quality improvement, medical record abstraction, data analysis, social marketing, and much more. Which brings us to Quality Insights and Healthy Connections. Our role in the coalition is to provide marketing, branding, web infrastructure development, partnership coordination, resource creation, earned media, advertising, and webinar production, just like the webinar you're on today. With that, it's my great pleasure to turn the table over to Greg Perry, who is the president of the West Virginia Certification Board for Addiction and Prevention Professionals, for today's keynote presentation, Using Lived Experience in Peer Recovery Support. Greg?
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Misty. And thank you to the folks at the West Virginia Office of Drug Control Policy for inviting me to come here and talk about something that's very personal to me, which is lived experience. I love that lived experience Mondays. I'm going to try to continue that theme and a lot of other things that I do. I think every day is lived experience day in my world, but specifically having Mondays I think would be a pretty cool thing. So we're going to have to develop that further. As Shannon said, my name's Greg Perry. You can see on the screen there. I am currently serving as the president of the West Virginia Certification Board for Addiction and Prevention Professionals, also known as CBAPP or the Certification Board. It's quite a mouthful to say all of that over and over and over again, so sometimes I'll abbreviate it. And our offices are located in Dunbar, which is where I am today. And our board of directors is all volunteers who work and serve in the treatment, clinical treatment, recovery type area, and it's a bunch of great people whose primary goal is to make sure those who are out there working and serving in the field do so at the highest level possible so that we can deliver the best care possible to those who are seeking treatment, seeking recovery. I'm going to hopefully click the right way. I did it. All right. So we got to start this out, since this is about lived experience. I got to tell you my lived experience, because that gives you my point of view here. You see a wonderful selfie picture there of me with my wife and my daughter a couple years ago down in Tennessee. And that's me. And for the longest time, I was a successful photographer, magazine publisher, and a designer. And then alcohol and drugs took over my life. This is back in the early, mid, late 2000s, pretty much the whole decade of 2000s. And when that happened, I found my way to what is now known as Recovery Point Huntington. Back then, it was called the Healing Place of Huntington. Nothing changed with it except for the name. And I went through that program in 2012. My sobriety date is May 21, 2012. And I completed the program, because you never really finish it. I completed the program on December 31, the very last day of the year, in 2012. And that brought me into the world of peer recovery. For those of you that don't know, Recovery Point programs are all peer-to-peer. It's a fantastic program that's offered at no cost to the individual. It takes the better part of a year to go through the program. It's residential. You live there, you work there, you do everything there. And I can't speak highly enough of it. And when I came out of the program, went and worked one other clinical treatment place for a little while. And then Recovery Point hired me in the administration. And I was originally a program coordinator for a couple years. And then I got back into the creative field, working at my old employer, Kinder Communications in Huntington, for a couple years as their creative director. And then Recovery Point lured me back. And so I was there for another 2 years. This time, my role was the Director of Recovery Support Services, which encompassed a whole bunch of stuff. But a good chunk of it was creating a curriculum, teaching a curriculum, and supervising, hiring, sometimes firing those who worked in the role of a peer recovery support specialist or a peer recovery coach. And so had a lot of things going on there. And then most recently, I took a job, which is where I am now. I am now a drone pilot for one of the biggest construction companies in the state of West Virginia Paving, and which is pretty cool. But I'm still here in Dunbar and just up the street from the certification board. I did attain the PR, which stands for Peer Recovery Credential, offered by the certification board in 2014, which was the very first year that it was made available in West Virginia. In my stint at Recovery Point, West Virginia, I trained over 300 people in classes to go and acquire the PR credential. Not all of them did, but that was the number that attended our classes and who received certificates for those classes. I provided oversight, supervision to a core of Recovery Point, West Virginia peer recovery support specialists. We called them peer recovery coaches. Recovery Point has them in various settings all over the area. We're going to get into that a little bit later on here. And I was nominated to the board of the West Virginia Certification Board in 2016, and I've been there ever since. And I was elected their president of the board, started serving in November of 2019. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm now a professional drone pilot, and I do communications work for West Virginia Paving Incorporated, which is all across the state of West Virginia, but our offices are here in Dunbar. So that's a little bit about me, so you know the perspective I'm coming from here. So using your lived experience as a job or as a way of helping others involves in West Virginia the PR credential. PR stands for peer recovery. It took me the longest time to not think of public relations whenever I heard PR, just because that was my world that I came from and still kind of live in. But PR stands for peer recovery. And you see on the right there a picture of my actual credential. Note that it says it expires here at the end of the month. I have applied for recertification, so hopefully I'm going to get that. But what is this PR credential? And why should someone with some lived experience who maybe has a year or 18 months or 2 years or 3 years or however long of sustained recovery, why would you want to go and get this? We're going to dive into that here in a little bit. you have to know that an organization called IC and RC, which is International Credentialing and Reciprocity Consortium, it's a mouthful, is kind of the umbrella group nationally and internationally of all of these state boards for addiction and prevention professionals. And the PR credential is a paraprofessional credential designed to establish consistent levels of training and experience across the country for peer recovery support specialists who are out there working in the field. It's not a license. It is just a very basic credential to establish a foundation of training, and ethics is really the big part that kind of separates it. And just to give people a good footing so you can go out and help others, and while protecting them and protecting your own recovery as well. The requirements to acquire this credential: 500 hours of experience in the field. And it sounds like a lot, but really, if you're working full-time, 500 hours is right about 3 months of full-time work, just a touch more than 3 months. And it doesn't all have to be at one place. You can piece that together. If you've got 500 hours of experience at 2 different places or 3 different places, you can piece that all together so that it comes up to at least 500 hours of experience. You do have to have 2 years of recovery from substance use disorder, alcoholism, addiction, however you want to word it. And you're signing your name on a statement stating such. And that's a really big deal. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. Why 2 years? Well, there's a lot of input in that. Other entities and efforts out there initiated this 2-year statement of recovery, and we felt that it was appropriate in this. I'll just give you my personal experience, and again, this is a sample of one, which is me. But folks early in recovery maybe have gone through a clinical treatment program, gone through a recovery program, or they're out there doing it on their own in, say, a 12-step or a religious program. After about a year or year and a half, you start getting some footing under you and some confidence, and the ball keeps rolling, and things are getting better and better. And 2 years is about right, at least in my experience, where you can take on your own recovery as well as helping others initiate and sustain their own recovery. It's more of a timing thing, I think, personally, than anything else. 2 years seems about right. Also, a lot of folks that I know who have gone through recovery programs, once they go through a program, it takes about a year or so, and then they want to go out and find a job and get their life going again. And usually, if they haven't started working in the recovery field, in peer recovery, after about 2 years, they're probably going to go to another field, another profession, maybe the one they were in before they came into recovery. So there's a lot of angles on that, but just know that 2 years is the number in there, and it does work out pretty well. The good thing is that if you don't have 2 years when you start working and going after the credential, let's say you got 18 months. By the time you find a class, go through the class, apply for the credential, get approved to go take the test and all that, that's going to take a couple of months easily. It's just the way it works. So don't feel like you have to wait to get to 2 years to start the process. You can do it a little bit early and make everything kind of come out right in terms of timing. The class that you have to take in order to get this credential must have at least 46 clock hours of education, and the curriculum has to cover topics in 4 domains, which is just 4 areas of study, if you will. But now 16 of those 46 hours have to be in ethics and boundaries specific to peer recovery support services, and that's the important part, at least in my view right there. Those 16 hours, that's 2 full days that you're going to study and go through scenarios and role-playing and learn what ethics are and learn what boundaries are. And this is all designed, we have a saying that working in recovery is not the same thing as being in recovery. And that's where the ethics and boundaries really comes in. It teaches you how to separate your recovery from the work that you're doing so that they don't all kind of get jammed together. And that way you continue to practice self-care. You go to your meetings, your sessions, whatever it is that got you there, you continue doing that while you're working in the field. You have to have 25 hours of supervision, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Usually, if you're working in a clinical treatment center, that's going to be one of the clinicians there, maybe a social worker, counselor, et cetera, depending on how the place is set up. And that is a person supervising you and your work and how you carry yourself, how you help others, making sure you do it in an ethical manner. All that stuff goes into supervision. So once you apply for this and you send in your application and everything's good, you've got all that stuff, then you have to go and take an exam. And I know that just sends a shiver right down the spine of just about anybody, but it really isn't that difficult. If you have gone through the class, if you've paid attention, if you've studied a little bit before you go and take this exam to keep your head in the game and the topics, in the front of your brain, you will pass this. And once you pass that, that's the last hurdle. Then you are issued the PR credential, the picture of which you see over there on the right. You also get it in the form of a little card that you can put in your wallet or your purse or just keep in your desk drawer. And once you are issued that, then the clock starts running. Those are good for 2 years. And during that 2-year span, you have to acquire what are called CEUs, continuing education units. And one CEU is usually 1 hour in length of a class, not always, but usually. And notice that 6 of those have to be in those peer recovery ethics. We keep having to study that, restudy that, keep the topic fresh in our brains every couple of years, just so we don't find ourselves in a slippery slope, if you will, in some type of ethical problem or some type of boundary issue. So I told you ethics was going to be a big thing. That's one of the big emphasis here of this credential. But once you take the initial class, then you got to take some more ethics every couple of years, 6 hours. And so add up all that, and that's the credential. I mentioned earlier that, excuse me, you can see in the bottom there's a little gold-colored badge that says expires 9/30 of 2020. Mine expires at the end of this month, but I had to get all my stuff in by the end of August here, all of my CEU certificates, the application for it, all that good stuff. And fortunately, I got it in right before the end of the month, and so mine's in the process. I'm just like anybody else. Even though I'm president of this West Virginia Certification Board, I still have to get my CEUs. I still have to go out there and take the classes and go through the process. And I can tell you we've had a lot of folks recertify this year, which is a great sign. There is some funding that came to us from the West Virginia DHHR. I know a couple of folks are on this webinar right now that actually paid for the recertification and the initial certification. So thank you, West Virginia DHHR, for doing that. It has made it so much easier for a lot of people to not only get this PR credential, but to also recertify their credentials so they can continue to keep working. I can tell you it depends on where you're working, whether this credential is required before you start working, or some places, I know at Recovery Point where I worked, the condition we had in the job description was that you must begin this process and acquire it within 6 months of your hire. So we give people a little bit of time. Again, that's going to be different place to place. So if you're thinking about going to work as a peer recovery support specialist or you're already working, you need to find out what your individual company or agency's policy is with regards to that. Just know it's going to take you a couple of months from the beginning to the end. This is not going to happen in a week. This is not going to happen in 2 weeks. Usually, depending on the time of the year, it's going to take 1 to 2 months to go through this entire process. And that's if you catch everything perfectly lined up. Sometimes the classes for this can be hard to find or not offered as often as we would like. And so it may take a little bit of time. So plan a little bit of time. If you're going after the PR credential, give yourself some time to acquire all this stuff, to get the classes, and that way you shouldn't feel rushed in this process. It's a process that's hard to rush, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's what the PR credential is here in West Virginia. And the really great thing about this credential is that those who have it and are out there working in the field have some accountability with it. There is a process with the certification board. If someone were to do something in a non-ethical manner, let's say, and someone were to file an ethics complaint with the certification board, then we have the ability to go and investigate that situation, get everybody that's involved in it, hear all sides of the story, and our ethics committee come to a recommendation or conclusion, which can include everything from revoking the credentials to anything in between. And so it's a great accountability measure that keeps the peer recovery support specialist field, if you will, accountable to others. You know, we're not some all-knowing, all-seeing force that's out there. We only know what's brought to our attention, but it does provide a mechanism for dealing with some unpleasant or some bad, downright bad situations, I should say. And that's, in addition to all the other things I've talked about, that's one of the great things about this credential, is that it does provide some accountability, some methods of enforcement. And, you know, if something were to happen and a person were to get their credential revoked, usually that means they're no longer going to be able to work wherever it is that they're working. Not always, but usually. And so it carries some weight with it. And it keeps people working at the proper ethical level so they can go out and help others and also protect their own recovery. So, but you have to know what the role of a peer recovery support specialist is and what it's not, so you can kind of understand it. It's a very unique role in that it is not a clinical role, and it has a very narrow lane. You're not really a professional sober person, but there's a very narrow lane in which to operate in there. And one of the greatest things that we try to relay to folks that we've trained is how to stay in your lane. All of us get out of our lane from time to time because we want to help people. But within peer recovery, there's a lot on the line. And getting outside your lane can ultimately lead to doing some type of harm in some way, shape, or form. And so understanding what the role is and what it is not is critical to having success in the role of a peer recovery support specialist. What the role is, you're an ally and a confidant, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You're that person's ally. You are their confidant. You're a motivator and a cheerleader. You know, you don't have to bring pom-poms and all that other stuff. It just means that your clients, you know, you're going to be a cheerleader for them in initiating and sustaining their recovery. You are a role model and a mentor. And I love this one because if you would have told me 9 years ago that I personally would be a role model for anybody, I would have told you you're crazy. But that lived experience now, this really bad part of my life personally, I can now use that as an example to help others initiate and sustain their own recovery. I can show them or suggest to them, you know, here's what worked for me, maybe you need to take a look at it. You know, or that didn't work for me, and here's why, maybe you should consider that. So you're also a truth teller, and in this day and age, sometimes that's really hard to find, but in recovery, we have to tell the truth even when the truth hurts. And a lot of times the truth does hurt, but you got to remember the consequences of working in recovery is that if we are not above board and ethical and a truth teller, the consequences of that can be someone walking out of our program, leaving our program, and going back out and using drugs, consuming alcohol, and ultimately possibly even death. So the truth teller part of it, it's one that these days, I really relish when someone hits me with the truth. I thank them for it because it's something I needed to hear. You know, you are a problem solver, not so much that you do all the work for someone, but you can maybe open a door for them to solve a problem or to make things a little bit better in their life. Ultimately, you are a resource broker. That means having a handy-dandy guide or a bunch of contacts in your phone or however you keep it. But phone numbers, addresses, names of people in various agencies at services, in programs, who can provide things. You're going to play the role of a connector, if you will. You're going to connect your clients to the resources, the services, the people that they need. So you need to have something more than just the basic 800 number into an agency. You need to know someone who's there. And if you don't know who is in that role, ask somebody and find out. But always having those resources close at hand is a great thing, because you never know when you're going to need them. It's not always when you're working, I'll tell you that. I can't count the number of times I've had people at my church, or when I'm out shopping at Kroger's, or just about anywhere, and run into somebody and the conversation comes up, and the next thing I know, I'm referring them to another person, another agency, another service. And I got to be able to provide that resource, that phone number, that email address right then and there. One of the great things about this role is that you are an advocate. And there are two types of advocate. There's the lowercase a for a personal advocate. So I have a client, and maybe I need to go and advocate for them in front of a judge, or at the DMV, or at the DHHR, or wherever. You know, they're really not strong enough to maybe stand on their own 2 feet, and I can go out and kind of take the lead and advocate for them. Capital A advocate is a recovery community advocate in general. You're advocating for the entire community that's out there and all of the issues they may be facing, and that's a role that I greatly relish. So, now that you know what it is, you also have to know what it's not, and then you chip away these things and you can find out the narrow lane. So, peer recovery support specialist, not a therapist, not a counselor. We do not offer counseling services to anybody. We use our lived experience as an example for others. We are not a case manager as well. We don't act as a case manager, and if we find ourselves kind of sliding into that role, we need to put on the brakes, back up, and get back in our lane. We're not a nurse or a doctor, even though we may have a lot of experience with the medical profession and know some things, and that includes the pharmaceutical profession. We are not nurses, we are not doctors, we're not pharmacists, so we cannot give medical or medication advice to anybody. We are not a sponsor, even though a lot of people in recovery may go to 12-step programs. There are very clear differences between a sponsor and a peer recovery support specialist. And we can't act as a sponsor. If we find ourselves sliding into that, we need to back up, because we are not a sponsor. And we are not a clergy, we're not a pastor, a priest, a bishop, or anything like that. We do not give religious advice or promote any particular religion. So now you can start to see this very narrow lane that peers in recovery fit in. You are a person with lived experience who guides, mentors, motivates, cheerleads others who are looking to initiate and sustain their own recovery. We're a connector, a resource broker, we're a truth teller, and we're an advocate. And the hierarchy in this relationship is very small, meaning the role of peer recovery support specialist is not way up the ladder from the client. They're about as close to eye as you're going to get. So the difference with this role is ethics. And as I just mentioned, this role is less hierarchical than the counselor and client relationship, meaning a person early in long-term recovery and me, a person with 8 years, we're still in the same boat together. We're still people in recovery. And that kind of puts you at eye level with each other. There may be a slight hierarchy because you may be working in the title of, peer recovery support specialist in a program, and that person is the client. But again, it's very minimal. This position involves different core functions. For example, things like identification, mutuality, and shared power. Those are kind of the foundation of peer recovery. Identification primarily, meaning that if by telling my story, or I have a client identify with a part of my story, if they identify with a part of the problem or the bad part, then they'll identify with a part of the good bit of recovery, whatever that looks like. And the mutuality, we're all in the same boat together. No matter whether you have 1 day or 10 years, we're all in that same boat, and we all share a very common peril on a daily basis due to the nature of substance use disorder. And then there's shared power. There is no big power hierarchy difference in here. It's all kind of equally shared. It's all peer-to-peer, truly. Sometimes, though, that means that we hold a different worldview, our beliefs and values, than traditional helpers may. It's just a result of being in the recovery community and having experienced things in your life. I have some different beliefs and values than a lot of my family members do, just because of the things that I've experienced. And this word, I always have a hard time saying it, but iatrogenic, all that means is that there's the very real possibility that if we get in ethical trouble or an ethical situation, there could be an unintended treatment-caused harm or injury as a result of our actions or as a result of our inaction. The relationship is fiduciary in nature, meaning that there is faith placed in each other. A peer recovery support specialist can do harm by doing or not doing something. This relationship also has a higher level of accountability and duty as compared to a traditional friendship. And that last sentence may seem a little weird, but I can personally tell you my experience and experience of those around me, that those of us who have gone through, say, a particular program or a particular course of recovery together, it's a very deep friendship and level of accountability and duty, the likes of which I really don't have with anybody else in my life. As you come through recovery, early recovery, and you kind of fight the same battles, and you have some success and you have some failure, that tends to bond people together very deeply. And I can tell you in my experience, the people that I went through the Recovery Point program with, those are without a doubt the closest people to me in my life. They are people that, quite honestly, I would not have been caught dead with 10 years ago. And right now, they're the people that I trust the most, that I lean on the most, that I call for advice or suggestions. And there's just this higher level because we share this same common experience, this same lived experience of substance use disorder, recovery, and now out living life on life's terms. There's also the area of boundary management, and boundaries are very important in peer recovery. It can be an area of potentially considerable conflict between clinical service providers and peer recovery support specialists. They may have different boundaries in their relationship with clients or patients, however you want to word it. Peer recovery support specialists rely on reciprocity, and they seek to minimize social distance, meaning it's not a one-way street. Our relationship with our clients is not all one way. It's a two-way street because we are peers. When we seek to minimize social distance, we actually want to get socially as close as we can. I know in this day and age of COVID, you got to maintain your distance. I get that, but we're talking more about an intimacy level here because we're all part of the recovery community, and that's a pretty intimate community and relationship. So in ethics, here are some of the ways and some of the kind of core values that set it apart. We have to understand that peer support is voluntary. Recovery is voluntary. I'll keep using myself as an example here. I have 8 years and change of recovery, and that's all voluntary. Tomorrow I have to wake up and voluntarily agree with myself that I want to be in recovery today. So the whole thing is voluntary in nature. Peer supporters are hopeful. We can't get stuck in the negative part. We know about hope because we've seen it. We've been hopeless, and now we are hopeful because we know what it is. We've seen it work. We know that it's real. Peer supporters are open-minded. That means we are open to any pathway to recovery. We have to not just stick to one narrow pathway of recovery. That's what I know. I know one pathway, but whatever gets you there, that's the path that we're going to get you down. And we always have to keep our minds open. We had to get open-minded to enter recovery in the beginning, and we have to continue to open our minds as we work with others. Peer supporters are empathetic, meaning we can understand where someone's been. We may not understand all the exact details. The situations may be slightly different, but we understand what's going on in that situation because we've been in something similar, if not identical. Peer supporters are respectful, and the reason this sticks out there is because at some point someone showed the peer supporter, the peer recovery support specialist, someone showed them some respect, and maybe when you didn't really deserve a whole bunch of it, and that is kind of contagious. And so we know the value of respect and showing it and what it can do. Peer supporters facilitate change. We don't mandate change, we don't cause change, but we just facilitate it. We just kind of keep the process going and navigating the ups and downs of the entire process. Peer supporters are honest and direct. There is very little room for being politically correct in recovery, I can tell you that. Just because the nature of it and the consequences that can come about if someone were to leave or go out on a resentment. That way, that means we have to be honest and direct, and sometimes that honesty and directness, it can cause a little bit of emotional pain because nobody likes to hear the truth. But by hearing that, that's how we can start to facilitate that process of change. Peer support is mutual and it's reciprocal. So again, it's not a one-way street. Clients that I may have, it's not me telling them what to do, it's us working together as people in recovery so that we keep our feet moving. Peer support is equally shared power. We both have a stake in this because we are both in recovery, and we both have to act like our lives are on the line because they are, and we're all truly in this recovery thing together. Peer support is strengths-focused. We don't focus on the weakness, on the negative. We tend to keep our eyes focused on strengths. Everybody has strengths. Every situation offers strengths, and we have to stay focused on those. Peer support is transparent. There is nothing hidden. In any treatment program, recovery program, wherever we may work, what we're doing is 100% transparent. And then it is ultimately person-driven. It's all about the person that we're trying to help or who is trying to help us. And the difference is boundaries, and boundaries are an issue that I know early in my life I never really paid much attention to. But once you're in recovery and working with others, you have to establish boundaries. And again, this is to protect your own recovery. I always give the example of coming to work and thinking, I'm working in a recovery program, I'm going to absorb all this stuff, we're talking about it every day, and I'm just going to be surrounded by recovery. It's going to be all around me. My recovery is going to be so great. The problem is, working in recovery, working in the treatment field is a business like any other. There are pressures, there are deadlines, things don't always go the way they should. There are stresses just like any other job, and being able to put up boundaries to protect yourself is critical. Especially working in peer recovery, a lot of us will have dual or triple relationships with others simultaneously. For example, if we have clients, we may find ourselves members of the same 12-step fellowship, going to the same meeting. We may live in the same neighborhood, and we may work together as supervisor or volunteer, or they may be a client in the program we're working in. So now we got 3 different relationships, and each of those have a different level of intimacy. They have different boundaries. And so we always have to be mindful that we're not jamming all those together into one big giant ball where you can't tell one role ends and the next one begins. And that's why we have to have boundaries. Each of those roles requires a slightly different boundary, a different level of intimacy. And the best example I can give you of this is when I worked for Recovery Point, West Virginia, I would go to 12-step meetings. People would see me, and they would start asking me questions about Recovery Point and things going on and needing help with this, that, or the other. And I had to tell them, as long as it wasn't an emergency or some type of very serious situation, I'd say, you know what, I'm going to be in the office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Why don't you come and talk to me then? Right now, I'm Greg, the person in recovery working on myself, and I'm here to work on myself. And most of the time, people were okay with that. Again, if it's an emergency situation, we jump in and help. But otherwise, I have to let people know which hat I'm wearing at what time. Those boundaries equal self-care. By putting up those boundaries, we take care of ourselves. We honor our boundaries, and that can help us to prevent burnout, because it's real easy to burn out constantly helping people. Compassion fatigue is what it's called. And so by putting up those boundaries, learning how to put down the cell phone, learning how to put down the email, learning how to, when we're at home, be at home and interact with our friends, family, loved ones, and not be at work. The easiest example I give to you of that is email. If you're sitting on your couch at 9 o'clock at night and you're doing an email, where are you? The answer is physically you're sitting on your couch, but mentally you're somewhere else. And now you're not paying attention to your family members or friends or whatever. And mentally being somewhere else is a pretty dangerous thing, especially for people who have a past history of substance use disorder. And so email is one thing that I've tried to work on. And, you know, when I'm not working, I'm not working. And when I am working, I am working. So you have to beware of, I am the only person who can help this person type of thinking. It's real easy to fall into. Once you start helping people, we called it the recovery Jesus syndrome, where you start thinking, I'm the only one, nobody else can help this person. That's a pretty dangerous area. And you need to put up some boundaries there to get out of that thinking. Honoring our boundaries encourages people to get help from the appropriate sources. So now I told you a little bit about the role. What does it look like here in West Virginia? And these are just a few examples. There are so many others out there. You see Bernard and Chris over there on the right. This is from a couple years ago. Bernard has since moved on, working for another agency. I think Chris is still working for Recovery Point, but they were peer recovery support specialists in the emergency room at Cabell Huntington Hospital. They were on the front lines, and they made a huge difference with people coming in to the ER who had substance use disorder, showing symptoms of it. They would go in, identify with them a little bit. If they want to talk, they would talk. They could connect them to resources, and they just had a tremendous effect on that hospital emergency room. But that's not the only place you're going to find them. County health departments here in West Virginia have them. A lot of recovery houses and programs have them. Even on college campuses, you know, we're starting to see collegiate recovery programs pop up all across the state of West Virginia. And clinical treatment programs, which goes without saying, excuse me, on hospital inpatient floors, you know, in addition to the hospital ER, Recovery Point had some that were working on the floors, where you have someone admitted to the hospital for 2 days, 5 days, 2 weeks, however long it was. And you can really do some great work if you have 2 days, 5 days, a week to go back and visit with someone and try to identify with them and work with them. Quick response teams all over the state have peer recovery support specialists. And then there's telehealth behavioral health using telehealth, which since the COVID pandemic, telehealth has just skyrocketed here in the state of West Virginia. It's a great use for being able to make contact with a peer recovery support specialist at just about any time of the day. So now that you've learned about this credential and what it means, I can tell you here in the state of West Virginia that this credential is going to take on more and more importance in the peer recovery community and workforce as we go forward. And it's going to be something that you're going to need to have in order to work as a peer recovery support specialist, a peer recovery coach. The steps are real easy. The folks at the certification board made it so easy that even I can figure it out. So if you go to WVCBAPP.org, that's our website, and you click on certification or credentials, and you scroll down to the PR, you will find the entire application right there. You will find the entire manual right there. And the great thing about that application is that page 1 has a checklist. And as you do each thing, you put a check next to it, and when you run out of check marks, you're done. You put it in an envelope and you send it in. And that makes it easy for a knucklehead like me. Even I can figure it out. You then need to take a certification board approved PR credential training class of 46 clock hours in length. You fill out that PR credential application with all your documentation and stuff that it asks for in there. You send it in to the certification board offices, And again, depending on the time of the year and how busy we are, this could happen somewhat quickly, or it may take a couple weeks or maybe even a month, for this to go through the process. So give yourself plenty of time. And so you send it in, everything is verified, and then a testing day and time and location, you'll help choose that based on your schedule. You will go and take that exam, and you will pass it. I'm saying that right now. And within about a week or so, you'll be notified that you've been awarded the credential. You'll get the certificate, you'll get the card. And then you're looking at 2 years until you have to go out and recertify again. And once you have that in hand, then you need to go out there, use your lived experience, and help somebody. That's what you've gone through all these classes for. That's what you've gone through this whole process for, is to be able to go out there and really, truly help somebody, which I will tell you, as a person with a history of substance use disorder, helping others is addictive in a good way. And so put your effort and your knowledge and your lived experience to use by going out there and helping somebody. If you help just one person, I promise you this is worth it, because that person is going to help one person. That person is going to help 2 people, and it's just going to snowball from there. So that was kind of the Cliff Notes version of the PR credential, how to use your lived experience, what it looks like, what are some of the differences of it. I've tried to be as comprehensive as possible here, but really in 46 minutes, it's kind of hard to go through all of this. But should you have any further questions, right here on the slide, you can see my name, my title, and that is my Gmail address. That's my personal email address. Please feel free to send me an email if I can be of help to you in any way in pursuing and acquiring the PR credential here in West Virginia. I think that about does it for me, so I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon and let him take it away. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Greg. Excellent information. We do have a few minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions for Greg, simply use the Q&A player in WebEx that can be found on the lower right-hand side of your player. See, we've already got one comment that echoes my thoughts as well. Thank you, Greg, for a wonderful presentation. We've got some questions coming in too. Here's a great one that came in. This individual says, I was 3 years into recovery and slipped out of recovery for a few months, but now I'm entering my 1 year mark back in recovery again. Would I be considered for the certification with the certification board? Are there exceptions to the 2 years rule?
That's a great question. And the thing about being in recovery and the amount of time in recovery is that it is a self-attestation, meaning it is your word. You are saying this, you are signing your name to it and putting a date on it. And not that it's totally unprovable, but really we're taking you at your word. It is anecdotal in nature, in that if we did have to prove it, we would talk to this person and that person and that person and come to a conclusion based on it. So getting back to the example here, someone had, say, 2 years, 3 years out there, they relapsed and they came back, and now they're back on good footing for a year. That person has to kind of reach down deep inside of them and say, can I honestly sign my name as stating that I have 2 years of continuous recovery, sobriety, however you want to word it, and put my name on it? Can I honestly do that? That's a battle that they're going to have with themselves, because the words are pretty simple. 2 years of continuous recovery / sobriety is what's required. And so, again, I put that back on the person. Now let's fast forward, take a worst case scenario. Let's say that someone files an ethics complaint and says, you know what, this person only has 6 months, and they sign their name on there and it said, I have 2 years. Then that's an ethics complaint, and we need to start investigating, and that's when we're going to start contacting those around this person, maybe who they work for, whomever we need to contact, and try our best to verify if that is true or false. So my point is, you can avoid that mess completely just by being honest with yourself and honest with others. And in my world, this is me personally talking, not Greg, the certification board guy. If a person says, I relapsed and I've been back a year, I'm going to sign my name on stating that I have 2 years of continuous sobriety. I'm going to say you may need to rethink that.
All right. Thank you, Greg. More great questions coming in. This person asks, when is the next WVCBAPP class held? Are they in person or offered virtually?
Okay, thank you for the question. The classes are not held by the certification board. We have approved providers, and if you go on the website there, you can click on and see a list of approved providers across the state. And you need to get in touch with those approved providers to find out if they offer it, and if so, when they're offering it. I know Recovery Point offers it usually 2 or 3, maybe even 4 times a year. And again, I haven't worked there for quite a few months now. They may be offering it more frequently. But Recovery Point is a good place, naturally. I'm kind of biased towards them. But I know a lot of clinical behavioral health centers, offer the classes for this credential. There's a lot of providers across the state. So if you go to WVCBAPP.org and click on approved providers, you can find a list of them and hopefully find one close to you. Give them a call, see if they offer it, and see if you can't get signed up for it. Your second part of your question, are they offered virtually? Recovery Point began offering this virtually 3-4 years ago. Because we really wanted to reach out across the state, and the certification board approved that. So I can tell you Recovery Point's classes are offered virtually using something similar to what we're using now, WebEx. And that way you can do it live and in real time, and that way people don't have to travel, an hour or 2 or what have you to go to class in a classroom. So the answer is some places do offer it that way, other places offer it as a traditional class, if you will, in a physical location in a classroom.
Next question asks, can you comment on the NCPRSS credential?
Yeah, the NCPRSS credential is offered through, here in West Virginia, it's WVADC, WVAADC, which is the state chapter or board, if you will, of NADAC, which is the National Association of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors. And it is a nationwide credential, may even be international as well. And the requirements for it, there's a little bit more education involved in there compared to the PR credential. It's something I've considered going after. I just need to kind of put my nose to the grindstone and go after it. It's a great credential as well. It's more of a national nature. Now, I will say this, the PR credential in West Virginia is also national in nature, and that you do have reciprocity with other states. Not all of them, 46 of the 50. So if you were to get your credential here in West Virginia and move to, say, North Carolina, there's reciprocity between those 2 states. You may have to pay $10, $25, whatever, fill out a couple pieces of paper, and your credential would transfer to your new state. Same thing with the NCPRSS. It is nationwide in nature, I think, from the beginning. So either one is great. I would look for what requirements are going to be going forward here in the state in terms of maybe your agency or organization that you work for bills, say something like Medicaid, it may specify what credential you need to have. So I would pay attention to that as well.
Another good question here says, I have worked in the field for 3 years now. I'm getting everything ready to send in for testing. The class I took was 30 hours through CCAR. Can my work experience be used for the other 16 hours?
Great question. We've come across this numerous times over the last year and a half. And the class that you took through CCAR, which is Connecticut Communities for Addiction and Recovery, is a recovery coach academy, and they offer different versions of it, of different length, if you will. And they do offer a 46, 48-hour version of it. The one you took was 30. So 46 minus 30 equals 16. And that tells me they probably don't have the 16 hours of ethics. And my suggestion to you would be to acquire the 16 hours of ethics, because you have to have that under the PR credential. You have to have 46 clock hours of education, of which 16 are ethics. So go out and get yourself 16 hours of an ethics class and send in that certificate along with your CCAR certificate. And if it's not satisfactory, Dr. Ronnie Rittenhouse, who goes through all of these applications, she'll call you. She'll let you know, hey, you need to pick up an hour of this or 3 hours of that. And she's really helpful in that way. So go out and get you another 16. You cannot use work experience for 16 hours of education.
Similar question we got about hours. This person says, I'm in recovery and back in the workforce, but not in a position with my current job to get 500 hours of experience easily. What is the best way to get 500 hours of peer recovery specialist experience if you aren't working in the field of recovery?
I would say it's probably going to involve maybe volunteering with a local behavioral health center or recovery program. See if they have some room and some time for you to, volunteer 2 hours a week, 5 hours a week, 10, however many hours you can afford to give, and go over there and work with folks face to face in that type of environment with someone in a supervisory role and acquire your hours that way. That would be my best answer to you.
Okay. Another good question we received, are peer recovery coaches usually paired with the same gender, male to male or female to female?
It really depends on the agency or organization where you work. I would say most times, yes, they are, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I'll speak specifically to Recovery Point, West Virginia, where I worked. It is always that way because our facilities are either male or female. But also, we had peer recovery coaches working in a criminal justice setting. Anytime there was a possibility that, say, a male recovery coach had to transport a female client, we got a female recovery coach to ride along with them. It only takes one complaint. It only takes one episode of a person saying, I felt uncomfortable, and that just opens up a whole can of worms. So in order to avoid that, it's never foolproof, but it's always best to keep things same sex, just to avoid some of the complications and things that can come out of it. So again, it depends on where you work, but for the most part, I would say yes.
Thank you, Greg. A few more we have as we wrap up today. This next question, I'll answer this one because it's an easy one. Will this recording be available? Yes, we are recording today's webinar session and we'll be posting it to the Healthy Connections YouTube channel soon. If you're interested in getting that link, just reach out to Greg or any of us here on the Quality Insights team. We'll have contact information for us here in a moment. And just to wrap up today, Greg, 2 comments. These individuals said, thank you for mentioning the burnout and taking time to walk away from peer recovery and working on yourself with recovery. We often forget to do this. And the second comment says, thank you, Greg, for sharing your story and this information. It was a very informative session.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Greg, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. Please stick around. After you exit your WebEx player, you will be directed to a post-event feedback form in SurveyMonkey. It's just going to ask you 3 simple questions about your level of knowledge about today's topic and suggestions for future topics or any comments for our presenters. We would appreciate it if you take the time to fill that out and help us here at Healthy Connections provide better information to you all the time that's useful for what you're doing both personally and professionally. If you'd like to reach out to any of the folks today featured on the webinar, you see their email addresses there on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to provide more information to you at any time. With this, we will wrap up today's session as we are concluded on time. This has been using lived experience in peer recovery support, a presentation of Healthy Connections with keynote presenter Greg Perry. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great afternoon.